Hey folks, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Disc Golf here on the channel. And in this episode, we have quite the doozy of a topic to kick things off with, as this is the biggest story in disc golf for sure this past week, and perhaps one of the biggest stories in disc golf in quite some time. This could perhaps be the biggest scandal in the history of the sport, or certainly going to be up there, I would think, as far as things that have happened in disc golf thus far. But anyway, without further ado, let's hop into our opening story, which is the fact that Prodigy Disc is suing Gannon Buhr for a breach of contract. Now, this story comes out via Altaworld, published by Charlie Eisenhood and Christopher Wickland. So sorry if I'm pronouncing that one wrong, but I obviously wanted to give credit to the people who did the hard work of researching this story and getting all the information out there. And I'm going to kind of run you through it and kind of just give my take on the situation. And, you know, that's going to be that. So essentially what happens is that Prodigy Disc filed a lawsuit in the U.S. District Court against Gannon Buhr for attempting an early termination of his endorsement contract with the company. The Georgia-based manufacturer seeks to bar Buhr from working with or promoting a competitor, require Buhr to fulfill his Prodigy contract through the end of 2023, and also ask Buhr to pay monetary damages to Prodigy, which we'll get to a little bit later. This dispute has developed over the past few months and has swiftly accelerated into legal maneuvering earlier this year. Buhr and his mother, Michelle Nizam, again, sorry, not going to be pronouncing names correctly here, who co-signed his endorsement contract, which is important because obviously Gannon was a minor, and so he needed a guardian to co-sign it. So, you know, that's what that's about. You know, they reached out to Prodigy in November of 2022 requesting that Buhr be released from his endorsement contract. And according to Prodigy's filings, Prodigy responded to Buhr by expressing a willingness to restructure and renegotiate Buhr's deal. But then on January 13th, which is an important date, which we'll talk about, Buhr delivered an email notice to Prodigy that he was invoking a 30-day clock to terminate the endorsement contract on the basis of multiple material breaches. Now, Prodigy fires back, denying that these are any real contractual breaches, but the lawyers followed up with a February letter claiming that all cure attempts had failed and the termination of the contract was effective immediately. Now, when that contract was supposedly effective immediately terminated on this February 13th date, that is when you saw the video come out from Gannon Buhr on social media, basically announcing that he was no longer going to be playing for Prodigy. Now, at the time that video came out, obviously we didn't know about any of this stuff going on behind the scenes, and it seemed like a pretty reasonable and typical announcement video about leaving a sponsor, where he seemed to kind of thank Prodigy for being with him through his formative years as a disc golfer. Didn't really have anything negative to say about Prodigy. It seemed like your typical professional, you know, video announcement about moving on from a sponsor and looking to, you know, change course and seek new things in a career. So it didn't really seem that odd. But now, kind of behind the scenes, we're kind of seeing what's been going on since November of last year and kind of what happened, you know, in early to mid-January with this, you know, attempt at saying that, hey, you breached the contract, so therefore you have 30 days to remedy those breaches, and if you can't, then the contract is terminated. And they claim that after the 30 days were up, those things were not remedied, and so therefore the contract should be terminated. Now, obviously Prodigy disagrees, and that's why they are now following this lawsuit and attempting to, you know, hold Buhr to the contract through the end of 2023, prevent him from accepting any type of sponsorship from anybody that they deem to be a competitor, and, you know, that they need to have him exclusive to Prodigy in that regard when it comes to disc manufacturers and probably bags too. And, you know, that this is all kind of nonsense to them, you know, that there was no breaches in the contract and that should still stand and all that jazz. And so this is where we get to the meat and potatoes, I guess you could say, of the actual lawsuit. And so on January 13th, an email from Buhr to Prodigy alleged 5 items that he said constituted a material breach of the endorsement contract. And so essentially what this sets up, which I'm sure he was advised by his legal team on this, by the way. You know, lawyers were definitely involved in Buhr's email here. There's no doubt about it. It's very clear that Buhr's legal team was looking to try to weasel out of the contract through these material breach claims. And I guarantee you that they were not looking for them to ever be remedied. They were always looking to try to force that these things couldn't be remedied or weren't done so properly, and so therefore the breaches were there until the contract was terminated. That was always their goal. I don't think they were ever intending to try to renegotiate with Prodigy or sort things out. They wanted to move on. It's very clear that that's what's going on in this whole situation. So anyway, let's kind of look through these alleged contract breaches, right? So the first one is that Buhr didn't receive a PDGA Rookie of the Year commemorative disc, despite promises that he would get one. Now, commemorative discs like this are very common, whether it's a Player of the Year, a Rookie of the Year, maybe some other accomplishment, winning a major, winning a world title. These types of discs are common for virtually every company and every player, and it's a big way to earn money, not only for the player, but for the manufacturer, right? It's a special type of disc. It's going to be more sought after. It's going to have some meaning behind it. And again, it's a way to kind of reward the player for their accomplishments. They're going to get royalties on it. And it's just one of the many ways that players are going to generate revenue from their sponsor outside of just getting some type of base salary that's guaranteed. And we know that base salaries, particularly probably when his first contracts were going on years ago, were very low, very, very low. And so you really did rely on disc sales and royalties to really make the kind of money that you need to be making to really be a full-time athlete in disc golf and feel like you're going to be comfortable. So these are super important. Now, here's my take on this, is that if it is true that they promised this and they didn't fulfill it, that is really crappy. That is a broken promise. That really stinks. That impacts, Gannon Buhr's potential earnings. And it also kind of just is not a great way to be celebrating your player's accomplishment. This should be something that you should be really getting behind and fulfilling, right? I mean, it's mutually beneficial. You're going to have more product to sell, and Buhr's going to be able to make money off of this, which he rightly so should, because being Rookie of the Year is certainly a big accomplishment. Now, with all of that said, even if it's a promise, there's a difference between a promise and something that is legally binding and actually a part of the contract. Like this is the whole thing about handshakes and verbal promises versus getting something in writing that's legally binding, whether that be a part of your original contract or some sort of addendum that you make afterwards when you're restructuring the contract year to year or whatever the case may be. So while this is really lame and crappy, if this is true, which it seems to be true from what I can tell, is it actually a material breach? That is a whole different question that I don't have an answer for, that, really legal experts are going to debate about. And that's what this whole lawsuit's going to hinge on, is Buhr's legal team versus Prodigy's legal team on whether or not this is actually a material breach of the contract, or whether or not it was simply a broken promise, but not something that Prodigy can be liable for because it was not legally binding. It was not part of the contract, So that's going to be the big deal with this one. And that really is kind of the consistent theme through most of these alleged contract breaches. So the next one is that Buhr did not receive regular sales reports to verify royalty payments on disc. Buhr goes on to say that my mom and I were told that we could see these at any time, but that they were never sent to us, even though Prodigy knew that that was very important for us to have. And of course that makes sense. You want to be able to make sure that you are getting accurate royalty payments based on the sales of the disc that your name's attached to, and that you're contractually, entitled to getting portions of those sales, right? It makes perfect sense that you would want these documents to be able to verify that. That's just being smart. That's just making sure that, you're double checking what your company's doing and making sure that everything's kosher. So if it was true that he was supposed to be getting these reports to verify the royalties, and that was a part of his contract, and that didn't happen, then that would be a breach. However, if it was simply just being told that we could see those at any time, and that was just like a verbal agreement or something said in writing but not as a part of the contract, once again, it kind of goes back to the same issue with the Rookie of the Year disc, that there's a difference between a broken promise and actually going against something that was legally binding, that was written down in a contract or some other legal document, and therefore actually being some sort of breach. Again, that is going to be the debate through all these complaints. Now, the next one is that Buhr did not get to select which signature disc he would receive, and he was promised 2 signature discs, would only receive 1, which negatively impact his potential earnings. Now, Again, this goes back to something similar to the Rookie of the Year disc, where, again, this is a major way that players make money, is through signature disc sales and getting a portion of those sales. And so getting to select the signature disc is quite important because you know that certain discs are more popular than others and are going to sell better than others, which is going to impact what you're able to earn. This is just kind of common sense. That's why, for example, on Discraft, it's so highly sought after to get the Buzz or to get the Zone or to get some of the more popular molds that people are going to buy no matter whose name's on it, because it's a mold that they want. It's a popular mold, in which case the name doesn't really drive the sales as much as the mold itself does, right? But you want to attach yourself to that so that you can try to earn as much as you want. And then apparently on top of that, it's also that he was promised 2 discs, but he only got 1. Again, this comes down to, and I know this is a broken record situation, was this actually written in his contract that he was supposed to be able to pick which disc he would get and that he was supposed to get 2 instead of 1? Or was that simply something that was said in passing, verbally or through an email or in some way that is not legally binding? Something that actually Prodigy is not liable for. And that, again, will be the big thing that gets debated in court between both legal teams, and therefore whether or not this actually was some sort of material breach or not. So, again, I hate that I'm kind of being a little bit redundant, but really all these arguments really hinge on that very fact. Either that very fact is true and Gannon's right, and these are all breaches and therefore his contract's terminated, or Prodigy's right in the sense that, yeah, they didn't necessarily live up to the promises that they told Gannon, which is kind of crappy, and therefore they did kind of limit his income, which is kind of crappy, but they're not legally on the hook for it because it wasn't written into the contract. And so that's how it's going to go. Now, this one is very interesting to me because this definitely doesn't seem like it could be a part of the contract in any sort of way, but it's basically Gannon claiming that Prodigy's disc quality is poor and that the molds are inconsistent, and that he has made such complaints as far back as June 21st, which I assume if they're stating that date specifically, then they must have some email or some other form of communication as a piece of evidence to prove that he did in fact make these complaints way back when. And so that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And then flashing being a particularly quality control concern. So if you're a disc golfer, you know what flashing is. There's really no need for me to get into this. But if you're a non-disc golfer kind of checking this out, flashing is basically kind of this extra layer of plastic that's kind of on the bottom of the disc, particularly on the inner rim, that is just kind of a thing that happens in the injection process because, basically you're pressing plastic into a mold and forming a disc that way. And as it comes back, excess plastic could still be in certain areas, which causes this little thin layer to kind of extend past the normal lines of the disc. And that can make the disc less comfortable to hold in your hand. In fact, it can even kind of tear your hand up when you're throwing the disc because, again, you're generating a lot of speed and power when you're throwing. And so if that little thin piece of plastic is kind of scraping against your finger as the disc is leaving your hand, it can scratch you up. It can be uncomfortable. It can be uncomfortable to grab the disc and just not have a good hand feel, so you don't feel confident in throwing it. There's all kinds of things that go with flashing. And here's where I'll say a couple of things. One is this situation with Prodigy plastic being inconsistent is a very widely known kind of accepted thing in the disc golf space. Most people who play disc golf regularly or who have any sort of knowledge of disc manufacturers and disc in general will tell you that this is very, very true. Even certain Prodigy sponsored players will tell you this behind closed doors. They might not say it publicly because they want to represent their sponsor well and they don't want, maybe to violate some type of maybe disparagement clause or something like that might be in their contract where you're not supposed to speak ill, of the company that you're sponsored by. But this is very true that quality and consistency has been an issue for Prodigy in the past. It's certainly gotten better over time, but it's definitely true that a lot of players have to kind of rely on particular runs of disc that were made at particular points in time to really know that that's the run that's actually good and is actually going to perform the way that they expect, whereas maybe certain other runs, they know that this is not going to perform as well as they expect it to, or not do what they think it should do. So to give you an example, a Prodigy has a disc called the D1. It's supposed to be an overstable distance driver. Now, some runs of D1 that were made at certain years or whatever, do what you want it to do. It is an overstable distance driver. But other runs of D1 will sometimes be more neutral or more understable and not be able to handle torque as well and not therefore fly the way you want it to. And so people are known to try to find these particular golden runs of discs that actually perform the way that they want. Another example for Prodigy in particular is the Bowling Green D3, which is a particular run of D3 that is very overstable, whereas most other D3s are typically known to be more understable. And this is for people with higher arm speeds and professional players, not for your average Joe who might have D3s or D2s or D1s or whatever fly much differently for them than someone with a higher arm speed or a professional player would have, right? And this is interesting because, like, this is obviously the equipment that he has to use because he is sponsored by Prodigy, and he needs it to perform a certain way in order to feel like he's getting the results that he's supposed to be getting out of it. And, you need to be able to trust your equipment to be able to perform well on the course, and you need good equipment to be able to perform well on the course. You can't go out there and throw low-quality disc and expect to maximize your performance. So this is an important back and forth that I could see a player and a company having about disc, and I'm sure it happens all the time, even with other manufacturers. But the fact of the matter is it's a tough sell because he did perform so well, despite supposedly the disc quality being poor. And so that's going to be a weird back and forth on just how bad is it really if you are still performing as well as you are while using it. And it also will come down to the timing of when he actually made a complaint. If he had been playing with this plastic for years and never said a word, and then all of a sudden out of nowhere he decides he wants to complain about it, then, you kind of wonder about the timing of it all and how legitimate the complaint really is. Now, they say that the complaint goes back as far as June 2021. If that's true, then that has been some time ago. But for us, all we can tell is that his complaint is in this list of breaches on January 13th, which is only about a month and a half ago. So basically never complained throughout the course of 2022 when he was having all his success, winning USDGC, being a consistent top 5 player, all that jazz. So this one might be hard to sell, honestly. And even if it was, I don't know what would be legally binding about this. Like, what would be in his contract that would actually merit this complaint having any real pull as being a material breach. That one's tough. But again, I am aware of the fact that Prodigy has been under the gun about consistency and stuff. So, like, this is somewhat factually true in the sense that this is kind of a well-known problem Prodigy has had, but I don't know how you're going to make this like an actual legal battle over it. And I'm also going to say that I am aware of at least 2 players that are no longer sponsored by Prodigy, but that have been in the past, that have also had issues getting the signature disc that they were supposed to get, getting as many discs as they were promised to get, and getting their allotments that they were supposed to get. Because certain players, on top of making money, are supposed to get a certain allotment of disc. Disc for free, basically, from the company that they can either use to play with, like it's their inventory, it's their main disc they put in their bag, or maybe backups, in case they lose a disc at a tournament or practice round, whatever the case may be. A lot of times there is an allotment that's part of your contract, or they can use that allotment to sell and to make money, right? And so I have heard of other players who have had this issue with Prodigy on not getting the disc they're supposed to get. So this basically doesn't surprise me, and I could see that this definitely did happen, but once again, it just boils down to what's legally in writing, what's legally binding, what is Prodigy actually liable for, and then what is just kind of crappy behavior on breaking a promise. But even with it being crappy, it's not something that you can legally fight them on, right? And then the last one being that he was owed $500 in unpaid bonuses, right? So in response, Prodigy sought to resolve or cure all these alleged breaches within the 30-day window. And what they did was they supposedly did pay Buhr the $500 that they owed him, and they did send him the sales reports that he wanted. And so therefore that would solve point 5 on this list of 5 contract breaches. They gave him the $500 within 30-day window, so apparently this was cured. Then they gave him the sales reports, so apparently that was cured. So now the only real complaints that are left are the Rookie of the Year disc, the signature disc, and the poor disc quality. So now going back to what Prodigy has done, they say in their filings that the signature disc and the Rookie of the Year disc are not breaches, as they were not specified in the contract as requirements. And again, that's all what this legal battle is going to boil down to, is what's actually a requirement as part of the contract and what was just simply a handshake promise that didn't get fulfilled. Now, they did come fire back about the claims of the poor disc quality, as, you know, Prodigy is obviously going to stand behind their product. And they were confused by the issue with the quality of the products because they had a situation where, you know, Buhr had such great success thus far in his career, and they feel like maybe that this was fabricated merely as an excuse to avoid the duties under their agreement, which does seem to be kind of the case. Like, even if we can all agree that Prodigy has had these issues, the timing of making this complaint is pretty clear on what's trying to be done here, in my opinion. And so basically they say that Gannon does not have the right to terminate the contract based on fictitious product quality concerns. And that's probably true. Like, even if this is totally true that the disc quality is poor, that's not a part of the contract, and therefore it wouldn't be a material breach, right? That's kind of one of those weird ones. I didn't really see how that was going to play out in his favor anyway. Then, supposedly, once we get past all that, you know, Prodigy CEO Mark Anderson said that they had made efforts to renegotiate Buhr's contract to increase his compensation heading into 2023. He apparently asked Gannon what he was seeking in terms of renewed compensation, and after discussions, he made a proposal to Gannon that included a compensation package that would approximately quadruple the compensation of the deal that he's currently under. So basically, they're saying that, hey, all these complaints are not valid. These are not material breaches, and therefore the contract still stands at the end of 2023. However, we are trying to communicate with him to make him happy, and we're trying to see what he wants, and we're trying to, you know, quadruple his compensation to appease him and try to still keep things cool, you know, and try to, you can tell here they're basically were trying to handle things behind closed doors and not allow this to get public. You know, they were clearly having disputes back and forth legally about whether his contract was still valid or not. But past all that, Prodigy was still trying to make him happy by trying to make him an offer. But then that rolls back to the other side of the coin, which is, if you're Gannon, do you really want to sign yourself to a company for even longer? You're already on the hook for one full more year if you don't win this lawsuit. Do you really want to be signing your life away to Prodigy for even more years for even more money? And here's the other question. Approximately quadruple the compensation package. Well, that really depends on what his compensation package is. If he's only getting a few $1,000s a month, then quadrupling it is still not going to be anywhere near what the market value of Gannon Buhr probably is, right? I mean, you're hearing about players who are getting guaranteed six-figure salaries a year. Now, obviously, some of the really big names like Paul Macbeth, Ricky, you know, Simon Lizotte, there's talks about those guys getting $1 million a year guaranteed salary on top of getting royalty payments from disc and, you know, other products and stuff like that. So if he was only making, let's say, $50,000, $60,000 a year off of guaranteed contracts, you know, even if you quadruple that, would that still really meet his market value? Would that still match up with maybe offers that he is getting from other companies, right? And so if you're Buhr and you're seeing this, yeah, maybe that does seem to be Prodigy trying to make things kosher and trying to make you happy. But A, we don't know what the starting point is, and so quadruple of that starting point could still be garbage, right, in comparison to what other people are making that are performing at the level that Gannon is performing at and kind of just where his market value probably is. And again, we don't know what other offers are out there, which could still be way higher than this supposed quadruple compensation. And so he would still be way better off moving on to that different company as far as like his financial future goes. But then basically Anderson goes on to say that they never heard a response from Buhr as far as this offer that they made about quadrupling his compensation. But then on February 13th, Buhr's lawyer sent an email that Prodigy had not cured any of the alleged breaches besides the $500 in bonuses, and therefore the contract was terminated. And then that's whenever Buhr made the Instagram video that we're talking about. However, 2 days later, Prodigy filed its lawsuit against Buhr. The first hearing considering the temporary restraining order and preliminary injunction was held on February 16th. The court has taken it under advisement that a follow-up hearing is scheduled for March 3rd. And so essentially, this now puts kind of Gannon Buhr in limbo, where until this gets settled in court, he technically still is under contract with Prodigy, and Prodigy is even, as you'll see in a minute, kind of trying to file a restraining order that forces forces Gannon to honor the contract and forces him to not work with anybody else or not endorse any competitor or, basically sign a contract with a different company and all of that jazz. Yeah, so basically it says right here that despite the relationship souring, Prodigy is asking the court to require Buhr to remain in his contract through its termination date at the end of 2023. And then they're saying that they estimate that Prodigy would lose up to $1.5 million in sales without Gannon being still under their contract, which, I mean, that is true. Like, if you're losing a big player, that you're losing money, and I can see how Prodigy would feel that is a monetary loss and therefore wanting to seek damages because of that. But it is also kind of crappy, Prodigy, if it's that bad that you're not managing your team well enough, or you're not finding other ways to market other people or market your product better to where you're so reliant upon this one person to make this money. Like, that's not really a good look. But anyway, they also say that, the impact of losing Gannon Buhr to one of our competitors goes beyond the sales figures, as he feels that Prodigy's brand's already suffering, their reputation, so to speak, because now that Gannon has come out and said that he's leaving, they feel that consumers out there now will suspect that there is something wrong with Prodigy because Gannon doesn't want to be affiliated with them anymore, even after they had already announced that Gannon was going to be a part of the core team for 2023. And even Gannon himself announced that 4 weeks ago on Instagram on his social media page, where he said, let's go, basically hashtag Prodigy and all that jazz, which I kind of talked about in the last episode. Then another thing that was actually kind of funny that we'll touch on here is that, the CEO of Prodigy was basically saying that it's troubling and worrisome about some of the memes that are coming out, like this one right here, where, Gannon Buhr is peacing out, and so that means that Prodigy is dead, which is kind of true because, like, Prodigy's been leaking players left, right, and center over the past few years, like, losing Dickerson, losing Matt Oram, losing Katrina Allen, and several other players you could probably throw into the mix. Obviously, Gavin Babcock just left to go to Discmania this past year. And to be honest, Prodigy has never really, found a replacement for Katrina for the FPO team, so their FPO team is quite weak. And then on the MPO side, they have Gannon. Yeah, they have Isaac Robinson and Alden Harris that had kind of breakout years last year. They still have Kevin Jones, who's a big brand, despite maybe his performances not being as high last year as they have been in previous years, but he still plays pretty good golf and still has some solid placements here and there. But anyway, so, I mean, this meme is pretty funny, and it makes sense to me, but I don't know, what they're trying to get at here, because it's not like Gannon Buhr made this meme. So, I don't know what their argument really is supposed to be here as far as, what they're going to argue in court, because you can't hold Gannon Buhr accountable for how the community responds to things and what memes get created based on this story, or really what anyone says, right? It's not like Gannon can control how people react to this situation. Now, whether you want to say that the video he put out saying that he's leaving Prodigy is basically a signal for people to pile onto Prodigy for being a crappy company, but if you watch that video, it's not like Gannon dissed Prodigy in that video. It seemed pretty in line with any other announcement video you've ever seen about a player leaving a company. He didn't really have anything but nice things to say about Prodigy in that announcement video, right? So I don't really know how they're going to make this whole meme thing, or how the community's responding and how it's impacting their reputation. I don't know how you can really pin that on Gannon. He doesn't have any control over any of that stuff. So the court should not sit idly by and allow Gannon to publicly humiliate Prodigy and decimate its business in the manner he seeks to do now. Again, Gannon didn't make this damn meme. All right? He ain't the one out there dissing you. He ain't the one out there saying Prodigy's a joke. The fact that you allow this to get public is your own fault. And granted, I sympathize with Prodigy because it's a lose-lose situation filing this lawsuit, because there's the now court of public opinion, which is going to really always favor the player. The player always feels like the victim, usually when it comes to fandoms and communities around sports like this. I've seen it all the time in esports as well. So it's the court of public opinion that you're going to lose in, which is going to affect your reputation, which therefore is probably going to affect your sales numbers and just how people perceive you as a company in the disc golf space. And then there's the actual, real court where you're seeking monetary damages and you're seeking Buhr to fulfill his contract at the end of 2023. But even that gets really shady because let's say you win. Let's say that you prove that these aren't material breaches and so the contract is still valid. You basically have a disgruntled player representing you for the rest of the year. How does that look? Because now people are going to be talking about that all year long, that Gannon's begrudgingly still having to use your product because he doesn't truly want to be there. He tried to leave, and now we all know about it because the court filings are public record, and this report's out, and it's public. So it's a weird one because it's definitely a lose-lose for Prodigy, but they kind of brought it upon themselves by not finding a way to handle this behind closed doors. Whether there was a way that they could work with Gannon and maybe work with whatever company he might be going to next and maybe try to formulate some type of buyout or something like that. I don't know. So kind of on Prodigy for that, but I will say that it is one of those situations as well where it does feel odd that players can keep getting away with getting out their contracts early. It does seem to be setting a bad precedent, and I imagine that's why contracts are going to start becoming more ironclad and more well written out to where there's no loopholes or any way to slide through the cracks, that they're way more legally binding and way harder to fight, way harder to just leave. That is going to be the impact that we're going to see due to this situation, maybe due to what happened with Ricky leaving Innova early. Now the whole situation with Simon seemed pretty okay. Didn't seem like any parties were really upset in the situation. Supposedly Discmania got a buyout for Simon. Obviously MVP got what they wanted. Simon got what he wanted. It seemed like that was one of those player transfer situations, early contract termination, where all the parties were able to get together behind closed doors and make sure that everyone was somewhat satisfied. I'm sure Discmania is not happy that Simon's gone, so they're not completely satisfied, but they at least got something out of it, and it was handled properly behind closed doors, and everything's all good. No dirty laundry had to get aired. This situation, completely different. And so it's a tough one because I do sympathize with Gannon for, maybe feeling like he had a bunch of promises broken as far as disc he was supposed to get, which impacted his earnings. Again, he outgrew probably his base level salary due to his performance and due to the size of his brand now and due to his social media presence growing and him just becoming a superstar in the disc golf sport. Maybe he's not up there with a Ricky and a Paul as far as how much he's worth, but he's certainly worth way more than whatever his rookie contract was or whatever follow-up contracts he's done over the past couple of years. I mean, what he did in 2022 was crazy. He won a major. He was a consistent top 5 player. He had a ton of winnings. I think he won somewhere between $70,000 and $90,000 in earnings. So I mean, he was tearing it up out there performance-wise. So it's one of those things where I feel for Gannon because I feel like it does seem like he had these things promised him that didn't come to fruition. He feels like he should be earning more money salary-wise because of the type of player that he is now and the caliber that he's reached. Other companies probably feel the same way and are willing to pay him the sort of money that he wants out there. Now, whether or not Prodigy can afford to match it or not, I don't know. But I also see it from Prodigy's side where you do have this guy under contract and you're kind of getting screwed if he's able just to get out of it early like some other players have done. I do think it's kind of crappy just seeing people be able to just, follow their contracts early. It doesn't seem very professional. So both sides have definitely done wrongs here, I think. But if it's true that some of these things were actually material breaches, if they can somehow prove that was legally binding, that Prodigy was supposed to do these things, they didn't do it, and so therefore the contract is void, fair enough, man. That just comes down to what the judge thinks and how the courts go. And that's not on us. That's on the actual legal experts who really, truly know the nitty-gritty of this stuff. We're just reacting to what we're seeing publicly, and I can tell you this, in the court of public opinion, Prodigy is going to take a loss here as far as their reputation goes, and I'm sure it will impact their sales, but to say that Gannon Buhr is directly publicly humiliating you, that is a very hard sell to me because I don't think Gannon has written or verbally said anything to that degree. It's not like he came out on his video where he was announced leaving, saying, "Yeah, Prodigy freaking sucks. Their plastic is terrible. I'm sick of throwing it. I'm ready to move on to a better product and better money. Prodigy's cheap. They don't pay me. They don't give me what I want." He never publicly came out and did any of those things. So this whole idea about public humiliation to me is totally invalid, and I think that's a big reach from Prodigy to try to claim that's because these memes are coming out that somehow it's Gannon responsible for that humiliation. No. Once this stuff gets out on the internet and the community does what they want with it, it's not under Gannon's control anymore. It's under no one's control. That's just how the internet works. And so to try to pin it on him, I think it's a little bit ridiculous. The only reason why this stuff is coming out where Buhr, like, here's the thing. This January 13th email where he did humiliate you by saying that your disc quality is poor, that was a private communication that none of us would have ever known about if you didn't file this lawsuit. And if this didn't get to become a public record, which it's a public record because I'm showing you right here, you can go to Court Lister and you can actually find this lawsuit and you can actually run through all the documents, which basically this main document, this complaint, basically just shows what I've been talking about this whole video, which is that Prodigy is complaining that Gannon's trying to breach his contract early, and then Gannon has all of his complaints that he feels are material breaches of contract that should allow him to terminate the contract. And then there's the motion for a temporary restraining order where, Prodigy is basically saying that, hey, court, we want you to force Gannon to play out this contract because it's still valid for the rest of 2023. And we want you to make sure that he is not allowed to represent our competitors or sign a new deal with someone else, all that jazz. And then there's also there was a court reassignment to a new judge, and now we're just waiting to see what happens next, basically. So, yeah, that's pretty much the story. I was also thinking about talking about the All-Star event a little bit, but obviously this whole Gannon Buhr situation and the Prodigy lawsuit is definitely the big story this week. And so with all that said, I'm actually going to cut this episode of Let's Talk Disc Golf here. Maybe I'll talk a little bit about All-Stars in the next episode, although we do have Vegas right on the horizon. That will probably be a big talking point as well. But, yeah, I hope you folks enjoyed this content. If you do, please follow, subscribe for more. Catch you next time.